Hello, dreamers, and welcome to the 325th episode of Killafornia Dreaming. And for today's story, we are headed back to the beautiful state of Florida. It's kind of in tandem with this month's Patreon bonus, which is also out of the lovely Sunshine State. But for today, I have somewhat of an unusual story I watched a couple of months ago on Oxygen. It was kind of a strange and different type of case, and I hadn't heard about this when it happened back in 2018. But before we get to that, I want to remind all of you that we are still going strong here at Killafornia Dreaming. So all of you can help out by following the show on Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, and YouTube. Subscribe to Killafornia Dreaming on YouTube. I could use more subscribers over there. Follow, like, share, comment, all the things. And if you're interested in supporting the production of the show and helping us keep it ad-free and keep it going, then you can subscribe to the premium content over on Patreon. Starting at just $1 a month, you can gain access to dozens of exclusive premium episodes with a new episode for your listening pleasure every month. I appreciate all the support from all of you through the years, and as long as you keep listening, I'll keep creating. All right, let's get started with today's story. This is the elaborate death of Alan Abrahamson. Our story today involves the January 25th, 2018 death of 71-year-old Palm Beach Garden, Florida resident Alan J. Abrahamson. Born July 9th, 1946 to parents Miriam and David, Alan was a native of West Hartford, Connecticut. He graduated from Kingswood Oxford School and then went on to earn his MBA at Syracuse University. For his career, Alan had been the owner of a building supply company called CNS, located in Windsor. He had been married twice, and he had adult children with his first wife, sadly from whom he was estranged at the time that this story took place. Why was Alan estranged from them? Well, we'll hear about it a little bit later on in the story, but Alan was married a second time. He did have stepchildren, I believe 3 of them. They were adults as well, or mostly adults as far as I know. And his second wife and his stepchildren were described as being beloved to him. So I did find that a little bit odd right from the beginning to be estranged from your own children, but to consider your stepkids to be the beloved ones. I mean, I guess biology doesn't necessarily mean you're going to automatically love each other. I just found it to be somewhat of an odd dynamic. But then again, I think we're going to find that Alan is going to be a little bit of an odd bird regardless of his relationship with his kids. Other than a small spattering of information I found online about Alan, there really isn't all that much about him out there to speak of. On Thursday, January 25th, 2018, just after 7 in the morning, Palm Beach Garden Police, or the West Palm Beach Police Department, I'm not 100% sure how the jurisdictions worked in the various communities in Florida. But anyway, the 911 dispatch received a call from a cyclist reporting that there seemed to be a man laying in the middle of a large field that is adjacent to the bike path that they were riding on in an affluent residential golf club community called Ballin Isles. The caller said the man appeared to be unresponsive and did not seem to be breathing. They described him as an older white gentleman. The first responders quickly arrived, but the man in the field was pronounced dead just a few minutes later at 7:16 a.m. The scene where this man's body was found struck first responders and crime scene analysts as being very strange from the onset, starting with the fact that the deceased man appeared to be laying down in a way that it seemed like he laid down quite gently and peacefully. He was laying flat on his back with his hands pretty much at his side, kind of just curled up next to his chest. I've heard that happens, like when you die, your arms kind of come up towards you. I'm not sure if that's with every case, but the way that they were, I've seen that position before. When he was found, his body was still warm and the process of rigor had not really started to set in. His feet were spread slightly apart. This man was pretty much laying there nearly perfectly symmetrical on his back. In addition to that, he had suffered a single gunshot wound to the left side of his chest, and it appeared as though he had been shot at a very close range, if not it being a contact wound. Because of the way that this man was laying on his back, face straight up, and dead from a close-range gunshot wound to his chest, the initial thought was that this man took his own life, so they fully expected to find the gun underneath his body when the time came to move him. And since the victim had already been pronounced, the policy is that detectives and law enforcement on scene have to wait for the medical examiner to arrive at the scene prior to moving anything at all. They have to have the medical examiner be the one to give the go-ahead to start, transporting the body over to the medical examiner's office. So while they wait for the medical examiner, they take a look at the decedent. They look at his body. They see that he was still warm and believe him to have not died too long before law enforcement arrived. The gunshot was right through the heart. The wound itself was small, indicating that the weapon used was a small caliber gun. Another kind of odd thing about the victim was where he was located. He was laying in this large open field in the middle of a very nice, affluent community. It was a very clear, bright, beautiful morning. He was just outside the Ballin Isles residential community, not too far away from the security guard shack associated with that community and that lets people and visitors through and deliveries and whatnot. You know what I mean? And while they seemed to be leaning towards this being a suicide, there was just something that was off about the whole thing. Him being face up the way that he was, being one of the biggest details that stood out as odd. It was almost like he had just gracefully laid down, perfectly symmetrical. The placement of the gunshot was also nearly perfectly centered right through the middle of his heart. Because of these two details, that is what initially led investigators to believe they'd find the gun underneath him. All indicators pointed to this being a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators also considered the fact that the area in which the man was found is considered to be virtually crime-free. It is an extremely safe community. A homicide in this area, in the middle of a bright weekday morning, is pretty much unheard of. So yeah, the general consensus was that this is self-inflicted, and it is pretty much open and shut, right? Yeah, not quite. The medical examiner finally arrived and gave the investigators the go-ahead to move the body. The first thing that was retrieved from the man's back pocket of the shorts that he was wearing was his wallet. And that is when they identified the man as 71-year-old Alan Abrahamson. It turned out he was a resident of the community adjacent to the field that he was found in. He lived in Ballin Isles. So it wasn't going to be too far of a trip to try and make that death notification, which they were getting ready to go do. A check in their computer when they ran Alan's information is that he lived in a home there in Ballin Islands with his second wife, Linda. Detectives went to the home that the man lived at and knocked on the door, but nobody answered. They checked in at the security guard shack and with the home's alarm company, but there hadn't been anyone that had come or gone, nor was there any unusual activity or alarms that were triggered or even set that morning. Further investigation into the residents of the home revealed that Alan's wife Linda was actually in Boston, Massachusetts at the time, some more than 1,400 miles away. So getting in touch with her was definitely at the top of the priority list that morning. They just needed to track her down. In the meantime, crime scene analysts are finding and collecting evidence from the scene of Alan's death and surrounding his body. Eventually, among the things and items found and collected would include a pair of earbuds connected to a cell phone that turned out to be Alan's. There was also a pair of scissors and some lengths of string. Also nearby were a few rubber bands and a binder clip. It just so happened that one of the investigators at the scene carried his cash using a binder clip in his pocket, so he had the thought that maybe the victim did the same thing, and perhaps there was something more to this. Maybe this could have been a potential robbery. I think that was kind of a big jump to make, at least in the show that I watched about this on Oxygen. It's the docuseries. But I also watched Dr. Grande on YouTube and his analysis on this case. And I think he mentioned in his episode that his wife Linda, Alan's wife Linda, confirmed that her husband did use a binder clip to hold his cash. So that bit of information gave the investigators pause, as they were initially thinking this was going to turn out to be a suicide. If there's more to the story, and this isn't going to be as open and shut as they may have hoped, they're going to have to do some more digging. Well, as it turned out, this was going to be a much more complicated case than they first assumed, because there was a huge inherent problem. The gun was nowhere to be found. Suddenly, the deceased person, a single gunshot wound to the chest, straight through the heart, in an open wide field, and no weapon anywhere around, then this must be a homicide. And everybody combed that entire field. They searched it. They dredged the nearby channel. There was a water, like an irrigation channel nearby, that were located on the golf course property, and there was nothing, no gun at all. They began thinking that they had a homicide on their hands, not a suicide like they originally thought. Another thing about this field that Alan was found in is that it is often used as a parking area when there are large events at the golf course or something of that sort. So it is possible that there are items that had just been inadvertently dropped in the field by people getting in and out of their cars. So they're not even really sure if these items that they collected are connected to the victim at all. But they decided to err on the side of caution and take everything that they found in the field just in case. And they'll take it back to the lab and test everything that they do collect, because you never know what further testing will reveal, especially when it comes to a potential DNA match in a crime, such as a homicide. Now that they believe that they potentially have a murder investigation on their hands. Eventually, the same day that Alan was found shot to death in the field, the investigators down there in Florida were able to track Linda down up in Boston. But before they broke the news to her that they found her husband shot to death in a field next to their neighborhood, they contacted the local police there in Boston and requested that they be there with Linda when they do break the news to her about her husband. And when the Florida detectives spoke to Linda on the phone and told her about Alan's death, she, of course, was inconsolable. She had traveled there to Boston to visit her daughter, who had recently given birth. In speaking to Linda, the detectives investigating Alan's death discovered that Alan had actually gone to Boston with Linda to visit. Remember, this would have been Alan's stepdaughter, right? As it turned out, Alan was not all that pleased with being on this trip, not in the least. His beloved stepchildren, right? I mean, this should be one of the happiest times of their lives. She's just had a baby. They're visiting Boston. It's January. Oh, January in Boston. That might be a problem, huh? If he's used to the Florida weather. Yeah, as it turned out, Alan, he wasn't happy about this trip. It was only a couple days into their visit that he began moaning and groaning about the visit and the weather and complaining about the hotel. I mean, the dude was from Connecticut to begin with, right? I realized that he ended up retiring in Florida, but still, these stepkids of his were described as his beloved stepchildren. Though I did get that from an obituary, which was probably written by his second wife, and she, probably worded it the way that she wanted to. So, who knows? But Alan didn't just tell his wife that he was going to fly home and he'd see her later when she got home. He told her that he was going to fly home for a week and then come back to Boston. He said that he would fly back to Florida on Sunday, January 21st, and that he would come back to Massachusetts on Sunday, January 28th. So Alan flew home to West Palm Beach on that Sunday. And 4 days later, he was found dead in that field. And his wife, Linda, was completely beside herself with grief. She could not make sense of what could have possibly happened to Alan and why. According to Linda, Alan was an incredibly happy man. He was the life of the party type. He was a guy without an enemy in the world to speak of. Linda described him as always happy, always having a good time everywhere he goes and with everyone that he's with. He was happy in retirement. He loved living in Florida. He enjoyed the beautiful country club that they lived on. Golfing was a passion of Alan's. And the guy apparently didn't know a stranger anywhere in the community. Everyone liked the guy. He apparently golfed regularly along with the other residents that grew to become his friends over the years that he moved in. It had been about, I believe he moved in there around 2013, about 5 years or so. Linda told investigators that it wasn't uncommon for Alan to take walks early in the morning. He'd often go walking around 5:30, so him being out there at that time wasn't that unusual to her. Linda was also able to identify some of the items at the scene as belonging to Alan or to their home, including the phone and the binder clip, which she did confirm that yes, he would usually have somewhere between $300 and $500 clipped into it. Linda also pointed out that she recently gave Alan a very special watch for Christmas the month prior, and it was an important gift that meant a great deal to him, and that watch was missing as well. After speaking to Linda, investigators were now looking at Alan's death as a potential robbery homicide. And they do not get too many robbery homicides in the Palm Beach Garden area. So the investigation shifted to this being a murder. Linda made arrangements to fly home in order to speak to the detectives directly to give them as much information as she possibly could to help them solve her husband's murder. Now that the focus has moved on to this being a homicide investigation, detectives started speaking to residents and neighbors nearby to see if anyone saw or heard anything suspicious the morning that Alan was found dead. But interviews with potential witnesses turned up nothing. So they decided to try and take a look at the various items that were collected at the scene where Alan's body was found. They still wanted to try to make sense of some of the items that were there, because they actually didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. And it had investigators wondering if the items collected near Alan's body actually had anything to do with his death to begin with. The items were puzzling and actually brought about more questions than bringing about any answers at this stage of the investigation. And we're going to find that to be the case in several stages of this investigation. A homicide that is committed against someone in a public place like this, open field, usually involves evidence of a struggle, evidence of a fight to survive. The way that Alan was found peacefully laying down in what would otherwise appear to be like a beautiful meadow, it didn't make any sense at all. It really looked like Alan was just asleep and someone walked up and shot him at point blank range with near perfect precision, put a bullet directly into the middle of Alan's heart and taking his life. Alan peacefully passing away did not comport with having been killed in such a violent manner. This was a homicide where there was literally no fight to the death. Alan hadn't been running away from his assailant. His clothing was in perfect order with the exception of the bullet wound to his chest. His shoes were neatly tied and intact, perfectly in place. There was no indication he had done any kind of running or fleeing in the grass or the dirt. He had not a scratch or a mark on him to indicate that he tried to defend himself or put up any sort of fight. His hat was still placed near the top of his head. It had come off a little bit and was slightly askew, but it was definitely in a way where it would look like if you had a baseball cap on and just laid down to take a nap, and it would sort of fall off to the side of your head a little bit. Clearly, Alan had not been in any kind of fight. It didn't even look like he had an encounter with any sort of stressful situation, much less an assailant with a gun intent on robbing and killing him. Like I said, all of the circumstances surrounding the way that Alan was found only added to the confusion. Detectives decided early on in the investigation that they really couldn't rule out any possibility just yet. They're still looking at everything as being an option, as they've only been on the case for a few hours. And so they're hoping that the evidence will provide them with some investigative direction to go. But the critical piece of evidence that they're really wanting to get their hands on is the murder weapon, and hopefully the shell casing. I mentioned earlier that the field where Alan was found dead was scoured for these items. They searched the entire field and an adjacent canal. The area was described as being larger than an American football field. They looked through tall grass, bushes, tree lines, and they came up with exactly nothing. They sent in dive teams. They used their most advanced search equipment. They looked into storm drains and they went into sewage access ways, but they found nothing. So the sun set on the first day of the investigation with no real good answers as to what could have possibly happened to Alan Abrahamson. Yeah, so by the end of day one, they were no closer to figuring out who could have possibly done this. So the detectives were going to have to just wait and see if the medical examiner would be able to find any clues or any evidence or any answers as to what happened. Alan's autopsy was scheduled for the next day. The medical examiner was interviewed in the docuseries that I watched on this case on the Oxygen channel, and she stated the following, quote, "The body did not present any defensive wounds. Alan had one gunshot wound to the left side of his chest. The damage the bullet made to Alan's shirt had a small bit of blood stain around it, but there was an odd and barely noticeable line of blood pointed upwards towards the top of the defect of the shirt that he was wearing. So if this were a clock, this thin line of blood would be located at the 12 o'clock mark. And it kind of went across Alan's left shoulder a little bit. It appeared as though something was inadvertently dragged through the blood that was produced from Alan's bullet wound after he was shot. To the detectives, it looked like something had dragged through the blood and left that mark. So the question is, what could it have possibly been? They weren't sure, but it was certainly something that they needed to put a pin in and take a closer look at. The medical examiner also said in her interview that she was able to see on the victim's shirt around the bullet wound defect that there were some unburnt particles of gunpowder, and what that indicates is the gun was fired at a very close range, likely making direct contact with the surface of the clothing that Alan was wearing, likely making direct contact with his body. When the medical examiner shared this information with detectives, it furthered the notion for them that they were looking at this being a homicide, and in order for that person to be able to shoot Alan at that close of a range, it would have to have been somebody that Alan knew, someone that he was familiar with, someone that he trusted. They would have to know him in order to be able to get that close to him with a gun, to draw that gun, and to be able to fire it that easily, directly, and precisely into this man's heart. So if this was someone Alan knew, the next logical step would be to start identifying people in Alan's circle of friends and acquaintances. So after 2 days of investigation and more questions being raised than answers, the community began to express their fears and concerns about a killer in their previously safe and affluent neighborhood running around loose. People were very worried about their popular, friendly, well-known neighbor who was so brutally gunned down right near the entrance of their guarded, gated golfing community. This just wasn't something that was that common. People who live in ball-in aisles simply don't get shot like that when they're walking around out in public. It was very worrying for the community, but also for the police, worrying and confusing. Another person that was interviewed in the docuseries that I watched was a gentleman who met Alan a few years back when they were still working in sales, a man named George Blackstone. They became good friends after meeting through work, and he really just attested to the fact that by all accounts, Alan was a really content, happy-go-lucky, friendly kind of guy, and it simply didn't make any sense at all that someone would have any kind of reason to want him dead. Alan had lived a successful, unassuming life. His career was based around his own business that he created in building supplies. Alan had been married and divorced once before, and he had 2 adult children from that marriage. But a detail that stood out to me was the fact that at the time of his death, he was estranged from his own children. At the time when I started this story, I didn't know why, but I did figure that out later on because his children were also interviewed, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But apparently, as far as anyone knew, everybody in the world adored Alan. Not an enemy to speak of, but wait, except for his own biological children? I mean, I was estranged from my mother for much of the last couple years of her life, but nobody will really sit here and say that my mom was the happiest, friendliest person in the world without an enemy to speak of. It's almost laughable to hear myself actually say that. Very few people liked my mom, if any. The only person who showed up for her viewing was her auto mechanic and a random Catholic priest that I met a couple of weeks before she died. It was sort of a random story, and I might have told you about it in a previous episode, but I was driving with my mom the last time I saw her and the last time I took her out to eat. And I actually witnessed a car accident. We were in Little Saigon, so everyone, you could pretty much assume everybody driving is Vietnamese. So the priest was driving his vehicle and he was completely sideswiped by some older lady. So I pulled over because I felt like he was going to have a hard time. They were both elderly. They were both Vietnamese. Their English was a little bit broken. They both seemed really flustered. And so I just felt like this guy was going to need help. I don't know why, I just had that feeling, because this was an accident where if nobody saw it, they could have just said it was a draw, like both of you were at fault. But I saw what happened, and this guy was driving up the street. He was going not even the speed limit, he was probably driving slower. And I was kind of behind him off to the right. And this car just swung out of a neighborhood into the traffic lanes that we were traveling in and just completely turned right, pulled out into the left lane and sideswiped his car. And I kind of felt like this guy was going to have a hard time dealing with this woman. I don't know, I just assumed. She was an older Vietnamese lady, and that's just my personal experience, not the easiest people to deal with. So I gave him my number, and I told him, if you need a witness, I saw what happened, and I saw that the other driver, that woman, was 100% at fault. If you need me to talk to your insurance adjuster, just have them call me. Well, guess what? A little bit later on that same day, I got a call from the adult daughter of the female driver who caused the accident, and she tried to tell me that my involvement wouldn't be necessary, that she would handle the situation. And I was like, yeah, okay, lady, whatever. The Catholic priest, his name was Locke, by the way, he ended up having his insurance call me, and I gave my report over the phone. It was recorded, and he ended up getting his car fully fixed. My mom ended up passing away about a week later, and I had told him about her. When we were there, I said, I have to go. My mom is in the car. She's very sick, and I just took her out to get something to eat. So I will be in touch with you, but I got to get her home because she's got to go to bed. And I texted him a week later and told him that she had passed away. And yeah, he ended up showing up to the viewing, this random Catholic priest and her mechanic. That was it. The next day at my mom's funeral, 2 out of 3 of her surviving siblings, and she was one of 8. There was only 3 left at the time. Only 2 of them showed up. And they only basically showed up to tell me what a shitty person I am and how it's my fault that my mom died. So yeah, nobody's going to be talking about my mom lighting up any rooms anywhere ever. And when I hear about what a great and jovial and happy-go-skippy kind of guy Alan was, it gives me pause, and I think, was he really though? I'm not so sure he was as genuinely as happy as everyone seems to think that he was. I mean, his wife called him the life of the party. He's 71 years old. I don't know. What I know about this case, what I do know about this case, is I don't know what's going on with the guy. That's the only thing I know for sure. I'm sorry. I don't mean to make light of this case. It's a very sad story to begin with, but it's just really confusing. That's why I liked it. Another thing was this friend that they interviewed, George Blackstone. He described Alan as living the model lifestyle for somebody at that stage of life. He enjoyed a long, successful career, and George said, and this is almost a direct quote, I might be paraphrasing, he managed to get out of a miserable marriage. I don't know why the way that this friend of his worded that in the docuseries kind of bothered me. Like, I don't know if being able to get out of a miserable marriage equates to a success in life, but that's what he said. Then he said he made the move to warmer weather in Florida. He met and married his second wife, Linda, and they were apparently like teenagers in love. They had this great relationship, and her kids were apparently more beloved to him than his own. And I'm sorry if I'm sounding kind of complainy and negative about the details of this guy's life and the story. It's just because how the whole thing ends, and knowing what I know about this man, some of this stuff just really doesn't comport with me. I mean, his friend George here said that the relationship with Linda was wonderful. They resided in a very affluent and beautiful area. And then he described them as teenagers in love, that they were the most perfectly happy couple ever in the world. But the way that he left her in Boston doesn't really add up to me. I don't know if they were so close and so in love and traveled, 1,400 miles to visit family. I wouldn't up and leave, and because I didn't like the weather in the hotel, that bothered me that he did that. I would be upset if my husband decided to do that, which my husband actually did do something similar. We were living in California at the time, and we were visiting Arizona and Nevada. And at some point, he allegedly got a job interview back here in Las Vegas that he had been waiting for, and he needed to get to it, so he wanted to leave a little bit early. And I said, we didn't have like tons of money at the time, and I'm just like, well, we were in Arizona and he needed to get to Vegas before the next morning, and we weren't scheduled to leave just yet. We had driven there, and it was just a really inconvenient time. So we looked at different ways to travel. A flight was like really expensive that short of notice. And so the option was to take the Greyhound bus, right? And he agreed. But then what he ended up doing was I dropped him off at the Greyhound bus station. I thought he bought a ticket. We said our goodbyes. He ended up taking himself to the airport and getting a flight and spending hundreds of dollars that we couldn't afford behind my back. Now, that's typical of my ex-husband to do some bullshit like that. And to tell you the truth, now that I think about it, I don't even know if I believe he had a job interview. I honestly just think he just didn't want to be on this trip with us. And so, yeah, I'm very familiar with that feeling. We didn't travel a whole lot. I mostly traveled with my mom and my daughter whenever we went places because we didn't like each other that much, to be honest. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. So anyway, Linda, the wife, the widow now, ultimately made it back to Florida, and investigators met with her at her home to try and get whatever information she could possibly have to share that could shed some light on what happened to Alan. Linda was, of course, very distraught, very much the grieving widow. She showed all the right emotions, but she basically didn't have much more to say about the whole thing beyond what she was able to share with investigators when she first was contacted. That he usually had money in the binder clip and that he usually wore a watch that was very dear to him. But they were able to show her the scissors that they found next to Alan's body. They were a small pair of metal scissors, and she indicated that she was not familiar with the scissors and she had no idea who in the world would want to harm Alan like this. And after speaking to Linda and taking down her formal statement, she was ruled out as having anything to do with Alan's death. So she was very quickly cleared as a suspect. The investigation into Alan's shooting death revealed that he had recently made a change with the path that he took when he went on his morning walks, and that involved plans that he had to meet a neighbor friend of his named Victor for coffee. Alan would walk a certain route each morning, but then it kind of shifted and changed when he became acquainted with Victor, and he started walking a different way to head to the Starbucks every morning, where they would meet up and have a cup of coffee and chit-chat and move on with their mornings. And on the morning that Alan was found dead, Victor very much had plans to meet with him at the Starbucks sometime, shortly after 7 a.m. So the investigators approached Victor right away as a potential person of interest because they were wondering why he hadn't become alarmed when Alan didn't meet him for coffee that morning that he died. And Victor lived in the neighborhood where he would have gone past the scene of Alan's death. So when all of this happened, why didn't he call authorities to report that he had plans to meet with Alan the morning of his murder? And why didn't he reach out to Linda or to the police when he didn't show up, especially in the days following when he finds out that his friend was killed? So, like I said, Victor became a person of interest, and they brought him down to the police station for formal questioning. Victor was asked how long he had known Alan for, and he said pretty much that they've been friends since Alan moved in about 5 years earlier. The investigators told Victor that through the investigation into Alan's death, that they found out that he and Alan had recently began meeting for morning coffee, and that they were supposed to that morning as well. And Victor was like, yeah, and he gets the same thing every time we go, a small coffee and 2 ice cubes. So on the morning that Alan was found dead, they told Victor that they knew that they were supposed to meet up, but Alan never showed up. Was it unusual for Alan to not show up without calling or texting or letting him know? Victor said he really didn't think all that much of it, and he maybe left the Starbucks a little after 7 a.m., figuring that he probably overslept or something, that he really wasn't thinking that he needed to go up to his house and knock on his door and bother him by phone. Since he assumed Alan was asleep, he didn't want to disturb him. He did try to call him around 6:50-ish. He called twice, but it went to his voicemail, and he kind of sort of just left it at that. Now, I'm assuming that this guy, Victor, that they're talking to is in some type of work that involves law enforcement, because as he's being questioned, the detectives are saying stuff like, "You're an investigator, you know how this works." The idea that this detective is working from is that Victor would be the one to have known that Alan would be setting out on foot to head to the Starbucks that very morning. He would be the one that was aware that Alan was going to be coming out of that security gate near the guard shack at that specific time that day. Being the only person who was scheduled to meet with Alan that morning, he can kind of see how this looks, right? Victor had shown up at the Starbucks. Alan doesn't. He calls him a couple times, can't get a hold of him, and then what? They wanted to know what he did after he left the Starbucks. And Victor said that he went to the gym, a likely story, right? How many times have the killers been at the gym or working out and wearing earbuds, and I heard nothing suspicious at all? So many times. Liz Tecia Stout, she had the whole thing with her headphones on because she was going to work out, so she didn't hear herself being attacked and raped, right? Rebecca Fenton, remember that crazy lady with the red blonde or the strawberry blonde hair? She had that interview with Piers Morgan a few years back, and when she called 911, she must have said that she was in the gym at least a half a dozen times on the recording, of course, to make sure that she gets her alibi nailed down and documented on a 911 call. Who else was at the gym? That guy that was engaged to Ellen Greenberg, Sam Goldberg. Another person who just so happened to be working out at the gym at the exact window of time when their significant other is killed. Dahlia DiPolito, she was famously at the gym when the murder that she tried to have happen was supposed to have happened. The gym was going to be her alibi. The gym is quite a popular alibi, apparently. So they're thinking with this guy, Victor, he didn't show enough concern when Alan didn't arrive for coffee. It was suspicious to them that he didn't raise an alarm. And I guess maybe these detectives, that seems to be what they're getting from this. But I don't find it to be that big of a deal at all. It's not like these men are best buddies, lifelong friends. They're just neighbors who happen to drink coffee around the same time in the morning at the same Starbucks and enjoy meeting up for some small talk. And if they don't, they don't. Just because a guy doesn't show up this one time, I don't think it's alarming enough to want to go pounding on his front door and dialing up 911. So I'm not bothered by his lack of urgency when his friend didn't show up for his latte. However, the investigators also know that Victor drove right past the scene where Alan's body was discovered, and Victor did say he saw at least half a dozen police cars there, but he didn't even really put it together that it had anything to do with the fact that Alan failed to show up. And again, frankly, I don't think it's a big deal either. We pass by emergency situations pretty regularly throughout our lives, right? I was just going up the 15 coming back. I went to the California border yesterday. And we were driving back and we're on the 15 and we're just past the strip, and all of a sudden traffic just came to a stop. And there was like 6 cars scattered across the lanes, debris. It was like a pileup. And we literally had to like bob and weave through the traffic. So there's always something going on. You've seen me post in my group on Facebook about the things that happen around my oil shop. Yeah, it's not that alarming to see a group of police cars at a situation, especially in a neighborhood where there's not a lot of police activity. There's a lot around that have not that much to do at that time of day, I guess. I don't know what happens in Ballin Island, Florida at 7 a.m. But then again, this is Florida. Well, anyway, him driving by and not putting it together is just not a big deal. I drive around Vegas all the time, and I make it from Casino A to Casino B, and I barely remember the trip. And that's just because I'm focused on the road, not trying to rubberneck anything. So Victor characterized Alan as just being a regular guy that you might go and have a beer with or go golfing with. Just fun, laid back, that didn't seem to have anything other than retirement to do. Victor said that he had no idea who would want to harm Alan, and as far as he's aware, his relationship with Linda was amazing. They both came out of really bad first marriages, so the investigators decided that after talking to Victor, it didn't appear that he had anything to do with Alan's death, but because there was talk of an acrimonious first marriage involving Alan and his first wife, they wanted to take a closer look at that relationship, and they wanted to speak to his ex-wife and his biological kids next. So the investigators went about trying to speak to Alan's first family. He had a daughter named Rachel and a son named Daniel. The investigators discovered that Alan was estranged from his children. I mentioned that in the beginning, and I do find it to be a bit interesting, and it had me wondering why. The docuseries suggested that Alan had moved on to a new marriage with 3 stepchildren along with that, and that perhaps they drifted apart. The kids didn't speak too much to their dad, and it most likely had to do with the step family. But when they spoke to Alan's daughter, she said that they hadn't had a relationship since 2003. And this case happened in 2018, so it's been 15 years. I don't know how old Alan's kids were when this happened. Alan was 71 going on 72. His children could have been anywhere between 35 and 45-ish. So that would make the estrangement in 2003 have taken place when his kids were between 20 and 30 years old. So they were probably already adults by the time they really stopped talking to their dad or having a relationship with them, or at least the daughter. The son came on and interviewed as well. He didn't interview for the episode, but they showed clips of their questioning with police investigating Alan's death. So the investigator, I'm sorry if I'm confused here. My notes are a little bit jumbled up right here. I'm trying to write this really fast last night and I was kind of tired. But anyway, the investigators asked Rachel why they were estranged. And she said that Alan really wasn't an up close and personal, lovey-dovey kind of guy. He was just distant all the time. They didn't have a great childhood. Alan certainly wasn't the poster child for active parenting. And she said that he's probably that guy that shouldn't ever have had kids. But she also shared with the investigators that her dad wasn't the greatest father figure in the world, but he also wasn't a Boy Scout. He liked going out with friends, he liked drinking, and he could at times be pretty loud and obnoxious, and he can get on people's nerves. And then when he met and married Linda, he partied and socialized even more. It escalated after he got married a second time, according to his kids. So his son Daniel said about the same thing about their dad in his questioning with investigators, that his dad did like a good drink and a good party. And they do circle back to the drinking and his obnoxious personality. It kind of reminds me of the woman that I just covered on Patreon last week, Yvonne Serrano. The more she drinks, the worse she gets, but the drinking was most likely covering up a great deal of pain and inner turmoil for both Yvonne, who's the subject of our Patreon episode, and Alan here, who's the subject of this episode. It sounds like some self-medicating for both of them, you know? On top of everything else, Alan's daughter Rachel said that her dad cheated on her mom constantly. And how mom found out was that she had, some years after the fact, had randomly received a letter from a woman who used to babysit Rachel and her brother. And she was doing some 12-stepping and needed to make amends for having a sexual relationship with her father while she was working as their babysitter. So yeah, that's how the mom found out. I would be so like, can you imagine getting a letter in the mail like that out of the blue, thinking you're in this perfectly fine marriage? Well, I don't know if she thought it was perfectly fine, but living in denial's not a huge problem either if you want to. I mean, that's a safe place, I guess, for some people. I tried that and it didn't get me anywhere. But anyway, yeah, not the Boy Scout, this guy. Also, when Alan's first wife was thinking that they're mostly in a happy marriage, Alan himself was happily enjoying being on Match.com and actually actively dating while married to his first wife. Alan's daughter even told the investigators that her dad would print the profiles of some of the women that he was interested in, and he would leave them out in the open and around the house for everybody to see. And the more Rachel talked about this, the more it seemed to irritate her to be dredging up all these memories. So it appears to me like this was a matter of picking sides when the parents divorced and the kids picked mom for obvious reasons, I guess. If dad's constantly hurting their mom, they're going to want to protect her feelings and side with her. Rachel suspected that her dad left those printouts around the house as an act of arrogance and cockiness. So yeah, now you see how our perceptions of Alan have changed. Now that we're not hearing from his fun-loving social circle of golfing Floridians, but instead we're hearing some raw, emotional, hurtful things from his children. I was curious about the estrangement, and she, in her interview on this docuseries, Rachel, the daughter, definitely shined a very, very different light on Alan. He left printouts of potential dates around the house for his wife to see. Yeah, this is a guy that did not give two shits about his wife or her feelings. This was the success that his friend George spoke about. Getting out of an unhappy marriage. A big win for Alan, right? Cheat on her for years and then leave. I know we're only hearing the daughter side of the story, but what it shows us is how good Alan was at hiding who he really was from his friends. But anyway, his son Daniel said that he wouldn't have any idea who might want to cause his father harm. He just wasn't that involved with him. He didn't know his dad's life anymore. It was neither here nor there for any of them, all three of them, Alan's ex-wife and his ex-kids. All three of them had really very little to do with Alan, and on top of that, They all had rock-solid alibis, placing all three of them hundreds of miles away from where Alan was killed. So they're no longer persons of interest at this point in the investigation. But because they did learn some new and interesting details about Alan's life, investigators decided to go digging around in his past, as his reputation and character are now not as squeaky clean as they first thought in speaking to the people in this quote-unquote new phase of his life. One of the things that they wanted to know along those lines was, why is it that Alan hightailed it out of Boston, leaving his wife there? That seemed like a strange thing to do. One of her kids just had a baby, and he can only handle being there for a few days before he started getting antsy and wanting to go home. Like I said, would not be thrilled if the person that I'm traveling with started complaining and left to go home. My significant other thought it would be fun to lie to me about a potential job interview, tell me he's going to take a bus home and end up flying probably first class to go do whatever the hell he went to go do. He probably didn't even have a job interview, and I'd be willing to bet money on that. However, it's not even worth thinking about anymore. They wanted to know, why did Alan leave Boston? The fact that he came home and intended on going back after a week raised even more questions for investigators. First of all, starting with, what was he doing? What were his plans? Did he have something scheduled? Did he have an appointment? Who was he needing to go see that he had to cut his vacation with his wife and stepkids short? Maybe it was like his first marriage all over again and Alan was meeting and cheating online. A second double life in a second marriage? It's plausible. They're going to have to look into that some more. In the meantime, investigators began making a forensic analysis of Alan's cell phone. Everywhere that they have turned so far has been pretty much a dead end. The people closest to Alan are being ruled out one by one. So investigators decided that they needed to try and see what they could find in Alan's cell phone history that might be able to shed some light on what happened. They printed up an extraction report for Alan's phone, but there did not seem to be anything that could help provide any leads or tips or clues as to what happened. So the Palm Beach Garden crime analyst tried looking directly through Alan's phone and to see what she could find when she opened up whatever apps Alan had been using in the days leading up to his death. As it turned out, Alan had Google Maps on and also had his location services turned on. And his phone did, in fact, keep a record of where Alan went and when he went there in the days prior to his death. It turned out that they would find data created by Alan dating back almost a decade. But they first started looking at Alan's movements from the time that he arrived home from Boston on January 21st till the time he was found dead. After Alan arrived home, he ordered an Uber and got dropped off at his house. When Alan got there, he grabbed his car and then took himself to the Bank of America. I think that was the same day, maybe the next day. His next stop was to a gas supplier. I think he went there on the 23rd, which was 2 days after he got home. And a gas supplier, where you would get things like tanks of propane or helium, things of that nature. And that is something investigators are definitely going to have to look into more as well. So on the evening before Alan was killed, that would be January 24th, his Google Maps location showed that he drove his vehicle pretty much to the exact spot where he would be found dead 12 hours later. His phone showed that he remained at that location for 55 minutes. So again, they're not finding answers, but instead more questions like, what the hell was he doing out in that spot where he would wind up dead for 55 minutes the night before? And then after almost an hour in that location, Alan drove his vehicle back home according to his location pings, and he would stay there until the next morning. So the next morning, according to Google and his location, Alan began walking away from his home towards the field that he would be found dead in at 5:53 that morning. A little over an hour later, Alan would be discovered dead by a passerby. And that was another thing that the investigators just couldn't quite figure out. What was it about this large open field with literally nothing there? What was he doing all that time the night before? And what was he doing there back again 12 hours later and found shot to death? So they ended up turning to some surveillance camera footage that was captured by the guard shack located at the entrance of Ball and Isles where Alan lived. Going back a couple days, they did see him leaving to meet Victor for coffee the morning before he was shot. They found the footage from the Starbucks where both Victor and Alan were captured on video getting coffee and having some chit-chat. So that verified Victor's story about regularly meeting Alan for coffee each morning. So with that information, they were eventually able to definitively eliminate Victor as having anything to do with this. The lead detective on the case continued to meet with Victor in the days following Alan's death, and the more he got to know Victor, the more he was certain that he had nothing to do with Alan's killing. So when Alan was found shot to death, investigators did get surveillance footage from that guard shack, and once again, they saw Alan walking out of his neighborhood for the last time at 5:53 a.m. In the video, it appeared that Alan was carrying some sort of flat package or large envelope, and he had it in his left hand. They continued to watch the video even though there was nothing more to see regarding Alan beyond the final images of him walking towards his death. And while they couldn't see any more activity on the guard shack camera, they were able to sit there and listen for a while since the video also recorded audio. And 37.5 minutes later, a single gunshot rang out and was captured by the camera. The very shot that killed Alan. Unfortunately, the camera was a couple of 100 yards away from where Alan was at, so there was no way it would be able to capture anything to show the person who pulled the trigger and fired that shot. So now they have even more questions since they suddenly have a second block of time where Alan was in that open field and nothing seemed to be happening. He was there 55 minutes the night before, and then he was there 37 minutes that elapsed between the time he was seen walking past the guard shack carrying something in his hand to the sound of the gunshot captured on the recording. They had no idea what happened in those 37 minutes. It would have taken Alan 3 or 4 minutes to walk those 200 yards to the spot where his body was found. So even if you don't count the walking time, there's still more than a half hour that's unexplained for. So the only place that they could really try and look next is the item that Alan had in his hand, because that package was nowhere to be found at the scene of the shooting. The package opened up a bunch of brand new questions. What was in it? Where did it go? Did he give it to someone? Did he exchange it for something? Was it something valuable? Was he robbed and killed for it? They really wanted to know. So they went back to the timeline of that week that Alan had flown home from Boston. They wanted to know what were some of the things that Alan did that were out of the ordinary for him, places that he didn't normally go to or visit. Well, turns out that there were a couple of things that he did that stood out to investigators and to his wife, widow. And it was after he got that Uber ride home from the airport. He went to the bank and he visited not one gas supply company, but two. So they started there. The information that they got from the Bank of America was that Alan made a cash withdrawal of $300. And it seems like he went into the bank directly. It looks like they showed a still from the surveillance video, and it looks like he's talking to a teller. This would be from the teller's perspective, looking at him through the glass, you know what I mean? They pulled the surveillance, they got an image of him, and literally this guy is all smiles. I will show you. I'll probably use that picture as the thumbnail for this episode. It's consistent with what his wife and friends said about him. Very happy, very fulfilled. He's sitting there chit-chatting and he looks so happy in this picture. Anyway, after the bank, the investigators went to a company called Next Air, which is the gas supply place, and they found out from there that Alan had purchased a 40 cubic foot tank of helium, paying the cost of the tank, which was $189.95 in cash. Alan wanted to purchase a second tank, but that was their last one, and so they suggested he visit a different nearby store. They had a second tank, and Alan again paid just under $200 for a second 40 cubic square foot tank of helium. He made the first purchase on January 23rd, and he made the second purchase the following day on the 24th, and that would take us up to the day before his death. And with all of this information, it raised even more questions. What is Alan needing all of this helium for? The answer to that will be found in Alan's email. But the answer will only heighten the mysteriousness of Alan's movements and the purchases that he made in the days leading up to his death. Alan's Gmail account revealed that on Christmas Day, about exactly a month before his death, Alan purchased a weather balloon. In addition, there were emails between Alan and the weather balloon company going back several months to early 2017. On October 17, 2017, Alan sent an email to a company called High Altitude Science asking the following questions. Will a 350-gram balloon be able to hold 65 plus cubic feet of gas? And what will the approximate diameter of the balloon be at launch? The investigators found those questions to be oddly specific, but it would make sense now as to why Alan was purchasing helium. But the new question is, what's with the weather balloon and the particularly specific questions about its size and capacity? They decided that the next and only other place they could try and look in order to answer these new questions is to take another look at Alan's home. Maybe there's something there that will provide some more clear answers. With Alan's wife's permission, investigators conducted another search of his belongings, and when they looked in the garage, they found the empty box from High Altitude Science that the weather balloon was shipped in. When they asked Linda about it, that was the first that she had seen that box. She had no idea why Alan purchased a weather balloon. She did not know of him to have any sort of interest in the weather and the meteorology. She was as befuddled as the investigators were. But the discovery of the weather balloon explained a couple of things. It's the reason why Alan purchased all that helium. And because the weather balloon was gone, they wondered if that was what he was carrying in his left hand as he was seen on the surveillance the morning of his death. Again, most of the investigators were still scratching their heads until one of the detectives, or a couple of them having a conversation, came up with sort of a far-fetched hypothesis. Detectives from the Palm Beach Garden Police Department, along with some agents from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, that's kind of like their version of the state police, they had gotten together in order to toss around some ideas about what all of this meant. The shooting, the unusual items found at the scene, the weird purchase of helium and a weather balloon. And yeah, a couple of the investigators brought up a potential theory. They started talking about an episode of CSI Las Vegas where a man took his own life by shooting himself with his gun, but before actually pulling the trigger, he rigged it up so that a helium balloon would carry the gun away and make his death appear to be a suicide so that his family would be able to be eligible to collect his life insurance. Even though it kind of sounded a little bit out there, the idea of the balloon carrying the gun away so Alan could stage his own death to appear to be a homicide instead of a suicide for insurance purposes kind of started to make sense. So the idea was this. Alan got his weather balloon and his helium, and he went out into that field. He tied some string to the weather balloon, and then he tied the gun to the string. He laid down on the ground, shot himself in the chest, and the weather balloon carried the gun away, leaving behind a dead body with no murder weapon. And this would also explain that streak of blood that was seen on the shirt. if he used a string that dragged away a gun, it appears that that string left a streak of blood on his chest when that balloon floated away. A quick Google search will show that this is a thing that someone actually tried to do, likely inspired by the CSI episode. It did happen in real life. I found an article on the oxygen.com website, and I'll just read it to you and cite the article in the show notes. The headline says, "Helium balloons and a CSI episode help crack shooting death of restaurant executive." Red Lobster executive Thomas Hickman was found shot to death with duct tape over his mouth alongside a New Mexico road. The article was written in June of 2021 by Joe. I can't even begin to pronounce this name. It's Dziemianowicz. Dismanowicz, something like that. So anyway, that was exhausting to say that. The article says, detectives chasing down what looked like a murder along a lonely stretch of New Mexico highway shifted gears when evidence pointed them in an unexpected direction and revealed that the death wasn't at all what it seemed. On the morning of March 15th, 2008, a couple driving along US 84 spied a body on the side of the road and called 911. New Mexico State Police arrived at the scene where they found a lifeless middle-aged man laying on the ground. His mouth was duct taped shut, suggesting that he had been abducted. He had been shot once in the back of the head. Initially, it looked like an execution, investigators said. But a handgun tethered to several helium balloons, some of which were still inflated, found tangled up in a cactus about 10 yards from the body, added to this mystery. License plates from the car at the scene were used to identify the victim as 55-year-old Thomas Hickman, a Red Lobster director of operations from Richland Hills, Texas. He'd last been seen at a business meeting in Abilene, Texas, and was reported missing when he never showed up for a later gathering. After ruling out the 911 callers as murder suspects, investigators worked the case. They learned that Hickman was a gentle giant who stood 6.5 feet tall, and he had a wife of nearly 30 years, Lisa, and an adult son, Matthew. Hickman was much admired at the restaurant chain and in his community. He had seemingly no enemies. The medical examiner's report confirmed that the cause of death had been a single gunshot wound. Evidence showed that it was fired at close range. Hickman's wallet and credit cards were found in his car, which told police that this had not been a robbery. The only fingerprints found in the vehicle belonged to the victim himself. So anyway, this article goes on to explain that Hickman was experiencing some financial strains. His wife, Lisa, had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 2003, and her medical condition was a tremendous burden on them financially. When investigators searched Hickman's home, they found letters that he had written to his wife and son that contained instructions on what to do in the event of his death and instructions on obtaining the life insurance proceeds, as well as how he wanted them to handle the debt that they were in. It was also discovered that Hickman had purchased a gun in January of 2008, 2 months before his death. They found evidence of the alterations Hickman made to the gun, including metal shavings from where he filed down the serial number imprint. Hickman's internet search history revealed that he had been searching the weight capacity of balloons. And Mr. Hickman may have been able to pull it off if it hadn't been for those pesky cacti that his balloons got tangled up in and popped. And 2 months after he was found shot to death along that lonely New Mexico highway, the medical examiner classified his death as suicide. His life insurance ended up paying his family a portion of the amount of the policy because his death being self-inflicted. Once investigators on Alan's case started to entertain the helium balloon theory, the investigators looking into his death decided to go back to the field that he died in and thought it'd be wise that they expand their search. It was then that they found the multicolored rubber bands and the string. I had first been under the impression that they found that at the time of his death, but that was found on a second search of the field. Once they found those items, they went back to Alan's house to see if Linda recognized the items, and they wanted to also expand their search of his home as well. And when they got there, Linda showed them Alan's office where his desk and computer were at, and when they opened one of the drawers, they found matching rubber bands and matching string. But despite all of these new facts that are pointing to this gunshot wound having been self-inflicted, there was still an inherent problem: the reclassification of Alan's manner of death. We know from past episodes that it is very difficult to reclassify a suicide ruling, and most of the time, if the medical examiner is willing to change their findings, it almost always goes to undetermined or pending investigation. But to have a homicide reclassified as a suicide is almost unheard of. But they went back to speak to the medical examiner to share with her what they've discovered through their investigation. And based on what they told her, she agreed that what they're saying is possible, but they needed to corroborate their findings with more facts and more investigation. So for about the next month or so, investigators kept digging for evidence of Alan's death being a suicide, but it was kind of slow coming up with any more information. Eventually, one of these detectives would have a light bulb moment. It was about a month after Alan's death that one of the detectives on Alan's case had been home, and she had allowed her son to play with her phone. He was 7, and he was asking Siri random and silly questions. When she got the phone back from her son, she went to look at the My Activity tracker, and what she found was something that I just learned when I did this case as well. When you ask Siri questions, your phone records your voice. So this detective was able to listen to all the questions that her son was asking Siri or Google. So she wondered if Alan's phone had that feature and did the same thing. She dropped everything that evening at home and hightailed it back to work so she could get her hands on Alan's cell phone, which was in evidence. And she wanted to know if she could hear his voice coming from the great beyond. And she hit the jackpot. She opened up Alan's Google app and scrolled through the last few days of Alan's life, and she did see the searches that she needed to see in order to confirm that they were on the right track. Alan's phone recorded him asking how to commit suicide and ways to kill yourself. And astonishingly, they found that Alan's searches related to death, dying, and taking his own life, those started almost a decade earlier. In July of 2009, Alan's voice was recorded asking those very questions: how to commit suicide and ways to kill yourself. In 2010, Alan made a voice search for .380 ammo for sale. In 2016 is when researching weather balloons began appearing in Alan's history. So yeah, this was something Alan had been contemplating for quite some time. And most of it they were able to listen to, Alan asking those questions in his own voice, and the docuseries played a couple of the recordings. Alan can be heard asking, and he doesn't sound happy at all. He sounds like somebody who's really, really not wanting to be in this world anymore. He asked, do life insurance policies pay for suicide? Lifting capacity for a 3-foot balloon? How to tie a large balloon? Is there a way to hide a suicide gunshot? Shot in the heart? Do you die instantly? It really did hit these detectives when they realized that they were listening to Alan contemplating his own death from the grave. With all this information that was gathered through the investigation, a more solid theory began to take shape. On their own, each of the details surrounding Alan's death don't really point to the truth of what happened. But it was really the voice texting searches, either through Siri or Google, that completed the picture of what they believed happened to Alan and how Alan managed to almost pull this off. What they believed happened is that the night before, he drove his vehicle out to the area where he intended to shoot himself. He brought the helium tanks with him and set them out there or hid them in order for him to be able to use them the next morning. He also brought with him string, rubber bands, and They believe he brought the scissors as well. The next morning before dawn, Alan walked out of his house for the last time. It took him less than 5 minutes to arrive at the location that he'd prepared for himself the night before. It's believed that the item that Alan was carrying in his left hand was the weather balloon prior to being filled with helium. And then we get to the 33 unaccounted for minutes. It's believed that most of that time, or a good chunk of that time, would have been needed to fill the balloons or the balloon with helium. From there, what Alan did with the helium tanks is a mystery. Those were never recovered. However, investigators did find that there was a large trash bin in a shopping area adjacent to the field that he was found in. And they recalled seeing a trash truck drive off after having emptied that bin the morning that they were on scene where Alan had taken his own life. So they think that was the likeliest place where Alan disposed of the tanks. And I mean, clearly Alan was very thorough in his planning. This guy took years to contemplate his exit strategy, and he probably thought of everything, including figuring out that the trash pickup times, what those were for that particular bin, just to make sure that the tanks would be nowhere near the scene of his death by the time his body was discovered. After he rigged up the balloon, he did the string and the rubber bands and the scissors, using all of those items in whichever way that he did. I don't even want to theorize on how he did it because I don't want to give anybody any ideas. But whatever he did it in a way to make sure that the gun floated away after he shot himself, immediately be gone. And as for the shell casing, investigators think that the most plausible scenario is that Alan fashioned something to the gun in order to catch the shell casing as it was ejected to make sure that that evidence wasn't left behind either. They can't say for certain how Alan did it. I didn't even try looking it up because I don't even want to know how he did it. They just know Alan thought of almost everything. As for where the gun may have gone, they had experts take a look at the weather patterns and the size of the balloon and the weight of the gun, and they do all of those things that most of us had no use for in school: complex math, equations, geometry, physics, geography, meteorology, all the stuff that put us to sleep in school that we thought we'd never use, actually got used for a change to calculate the path of where the weather balloon and gun may have gone. Based on the weather patterns, they believe the balloon floated up carrying the gun, and that first it headed towards the west, but then was pulled into the opposite direction towards the east. And if their math was accurate, it likely hit the water or lost its ability to continue to float about 40 miles north of the Bahamas over the Atlantic Ocean. And once investigators put all of the evidence and information into a comprehensive report and had the medical examiner review it, she agreed that the manner of death was indeed suicide, and she changed her official ruling of homicide to reflect that. Once that happened, the detectives needed to go and speak to Alan's widow about their new conclusion. And I mean, dreamers, how awful would that be to not have to receive just one death notification, but for them to come back a couple months later and be like, yeah, remember when we talked last time and we were like, oh yeah, Alan was murdered? Scratch that. This was self-inflicted. I can only imagine how his wife felt in that moment. And I thought about that for a while. Like, if I got word that my significant other was killed, I was informed that my spouse or whomever was a victim of a homicide, and then for those detectives to come back and tell me that they've changed the ruling to suicide, I mean, is one easier to cope with than the other? I don't know. If I thought about it, I was like, I think homicide might be a little bit easier to accept, but I don't know. At least with the homicide, you're not left with questions that the loved ones of someone who takes their own life would tend to have if they did it to themselves, and people trying to convince themselves that their loved ones would never do something like this, that they would never hurt their surviving family members and make them have to live with the stigma. They were so happy in the days leading up to their death. We never saw this coming. This was so out of character. We would have never thought it. And it was true. Alan was happy and smiley. Most people who knew him could never have imagined. But for me, dreamers, I don't find Alan's demeanor prior to the day that he took his own life or the actual act itself, I don't find them to be necessarily mutually exclusive, We talked about the fact that when someone who decides that they're going to take their own life are really at peace with it, they might even start to have feelings of relief. And whatever is causing them to feel so down that they don't want to live anymore, and they just seem all right on the outside. Alan made it to 71 years of age with this heavy burden weighing him down for likely most of his adult life. I don't find the guy to be happy at all, at least not on his own. To me, Alan appeared to have a drinking problem, and if he was always happy and giddy and boisterous and the life of the party, but ended up taking his own life, it might be partly because of the drinking. Alan cheated on his first wife on a consistent basis, and he did so with impunity and arrogance. He purposely did things like leave printouts of his Match.com dates around the house for his wife and kids to see. And for his adult children to have all this knowledge about their dad's activities and actions and how much he was hurting their mom, it was no wonder they chose to not be a part of his life anymore. I don't find Alan to be happy at all. In fact, based on his behavior, I think the guy was utterly miserable. The drinking, the womanizing, the years upon years of researching how to take your own life. This guy, in my opinion, was extremely unhappy and spent at least the last 10 years of his life contemplating his death. Everything that Alan did could be attributed to him constantly looking for something better, the next best thing, because he kept searching for happiness or something. I don't know if it was happiness. But the problem was, whatever he was searching for, he was looking for it in all the wrong places, such as at the bottom of a liquor bottle, or in the bed of another woman, or on the internet, when each passing day, taking his own life was looking more and more and more like the right option for him. On top of everything else, I believe Alan to have been an incredibly selfish and narcissistic person. And that is really based solely on the Match.com profiles and those printouts. I mean, Alan's death is tragic, but I don't even know if people like Alan, who purposely hurt the ones that they're supposed to love the most, are even really capable of genuinely caring for someone else and protecting their feelings. When Linda was told how the investigation arrived at the conclusion that Alan took his own life, she seemed to be shocked. But once that initial shock wore off, she was able to make sense of some of it eventually, as the conversation about what happened evolved. While Linda did believe Alan to be perfectly fine, Mr. Life of the Party, Mr. Light Up the Room, while she did still think that of Alan, they were still making plans and booking vacations and things of that nature. Linda did say that Alan did have numerous life insurance policies. Each family member had at least one policy written out to them. And while you won't be able to just go and sign yourself up for a life insurance policy, drive home and take your own life, these policies that Alan had been in place for many, many years. So by the time he actually died, they had long passed the point of where insurance carrier would be able to deny payment. The policies could no longer be contested. So, what does that tell us? Alan didn't have to take his own life in order for his family members to receive the insurance payouts. And by the way, they also found in his financial records that right before he died, he paid a whole bunch of the premiums on every policy. So anyway, he didn't have to take his own life in order for his family members to receive those payouts, but he may not have known that and felt like he needed to stage a homicide in order for his family to get the money. But either way, the news of Alan taking his own life was still so shocking to everyone who knew him. He was apparently able to put up a pretty good front, considering how depressed and unhappy or simply just done with life that he actually was on the inside. Some of Alan's friends believe Alan didn't want his family to know that he took his own life, so he put together this whole elaborate plan to stage a homicide, which in and of itself actually isn't the wisest thing to do either, because he could have set someone up to go down for a murder when there was no murder to go down for. How much would that suck? Anybody could have been targeted by some overzealous detective and pressured into a confession, or the whole case just get twisted into fitting what they wanted it to fit into. So yeah, this whole balloon stunt with the helium does have the potential to end very, very badly. Would not recommend. And that, my dreamers, was the tale of the elaborate death of Alan Abrahamson. I want to thank you all so much for listening. And if you are struggling, even if you're struggling right now, you're not alone. And there is help if you need it. You can call 911, but there is a hotline launched in 2022, and it's on the rise, and it's just as easy to dial. It's the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, 988. I promise you are not alone. And while I can't sit here and promise you that things will get better, I can promise you that you do matter and that you're going to want to be around when things do get better. And with that, I'll sign off. Thank you all so much for listening. Thank you for supporting. I love you all so much with all of my heart. And I will be back soon with another intriguing story. Until next time, take care, be safe, and sweet dreams. And please do not be afraid to reach out.